The smell of charcoal and lighter fluid hung in the air at the private lodge near Lake Tahoe. Family voices carried across the deck, my mother's laugh, my uncle's stories about his golf game, the clink of beer bottles against the wooden railing. I adjusted my uniform jacket and stepped out of my rental car. Still playing soldier, huh? Evan's voice cut through the birthday chatter before I'd even reached the steps. My brother stood by the grill spatula in one hand, beer in the other, that familiar smirk spreading across his face. 28 years old and still the golden boy in khakis and a polo shirt. Bet that uniform's just for show, he continued loud enough for everyone to hear. She probably alphabetizes granola bars at a base somewhere. His girlfriend Nicole laughed a sharp performative sound as she held up her phone. She was live streaming again, chasing whatever validation came from strangers, watching her life unfold in real time. Here's Colonel Clipboard. She announced to her audience, camera pointed at me. Army strong, right? I walked up the wooden steps without responding. The deck fell into that particular family silence, the kind that pretends nothing uncomfortable just happened while everyone waits to see what happens next. Jordan's always been steady, my mother said, her voice carrying that sweet, apologetic tone she used when she wanted to smooth things over. Not really the leadership type, but helpful. Helpful. The word landed like a gentle slap. My cousin Sarah looked up from her plate of potato salad, confusion creasing her teenage face. Wait, is she really in the army? Yeah, still am, I said, settling into an empty chair at the picnic table. I pulled my jacket close slightly, the fabric shifting to cover the insignia on my sleeve. Evan flipped a burger with theatrical flair. Let's be honest, if she's in uniform, it's probably for the food court discount. More laughter. Nicole's phone stayed trained on me, waiting for a reaction that would make good content. I reached for a water bottle from the cooler. My movements were precise, unhurried. The condensation felt cool against my palm. You know what I think, Evan continued, emboldened by his audience. I think she just likes the costume, makes her feel important. The birthday boy, my 8-year-old nephew, abandoned his cake to stare at me with wide eyes. Aunt Jordan, are you a real soldier? Before I could answer, Evan jumped in. She does paperwork, buddy, files reports. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not exactly saving the world. I took a sip of water. The lake stretched out beyond the deck mirror, still in the afternoon sun. A few boats moved across the surface, their wakes spreading in perfect V-shapes behind them. I wasn't hiding, I would tell people later. I was just done explaining myself to people who never listened. But sitting there listening to my brother perform for his girlfriend's camera, I felt something familiar settle in my chest. That old weight. The one that came from being erased politely, but thoroughly. Maybe you know what that feels like. To be the footnote in someone else's story. To have your truth dismissed before you even speak it. Nicole lowered her phone for a moment. Seriously though, what do you actually do, like day to day? I met her eyes. I serve. Right, but like, specifically, Evan waved his spatula dismissively. Don't bother, she's been playing mysterious about her job for years. Probably signs for supply deliveries or something. The conversation moved on. Uncle Mike started telling a story about his latest fishing trip. Someone turned up the music. My nephew went back to his cake, already losing interest in the adult drama. I sat quietly watching the lake, feeling the weight of my uniform against my shoulders. The fabric was crisp pressed. The insignia hidden beneath my jacket felt heavier than it should. On the table beside me, my encrypted device sat silent. Black screen, unremarkable case. It looked like any other phone. The afternoon stretched ahead, more jokes, more casual dismissals, more opportunities for my brother to remind everyone who mattered and who didn't. I'd driven 3 hours to be here, taken leave that I might not get back. Wore my uniform because I'd come straight from base, but I was still just Jordan. Still steady, still helpful, still invisible. I watched a hawk circle over the water, riding the thermals with effortless precision. It didn't announce itself, didn't perform, just moved through the air with perfect quiet purpose. Then everyone's phones buzzed at once. My name is Jordan James. Oldest daughter, former honor student, forgotten sibling. The phones kept buzzing around the table, that urgent simultaneous sound that means something real is happening. Emergency alerts. Everyone grabbed their devices at once, the birthday party suddenly forgotten. But I already knew what they were seeing. the same alert I'd received 30 seconds earlier on my encrypted device. The one that made my pulse quicken and my training kick in before anyone else even registered the threat. I am a full colonel in the United States Army. Active Emergency Command Certification. Incident Response Qualified. The kind of officer they call when things fall apart and someone needs to put them back together. My family believes I work in military logistics, paperwork and admin, supply chain management. They've believed this for 7 years, ever since I stopped trying to correct them. Holy shit, Evan said, staring at his phone. There's a wildfire. It's close. Nicole's live stream suddenly had a new focus. Oh my God, guys, there's like an emergency happening right now. This is insane. Around the table, voices rose in confusion and concern. My mother clutched her phone with both hands, reading the alert over and over. Uncle Mike was already standing looking toward the tree line, as if he could see smoke from here. How close? Sarah asked, her teenage voice smaller now. Says we might need to evacuate, my cousin David said, panic creeping into his tone. Like, actually leave. I sat perfectly still, watching them discover what I already knew. What I'd been monitoring for the past 6 hours through official channels. The fire had jumped its containment line. Weather conditions were deteriorating. The situation was about to become critical. They didn't know that evacuation wasn't a maybe. It was a certainty. They didn't know that I'd been tracking wind patterns, fuel moisture levels, and resource deployment since before I'd even left for this party. They didn't know that in approximately 4 minutes, my encrypted device would ring with orders that would change everything. We should pack up, my mother said, her voice shaking slightly. Maybe head back to town. The roads might be blocked, Uncle Mike said. If it's as bad as this sounds, I watched them spiral into the kind of panic that comes from suddenly realizing you're not in control, that things can change in an instant, and all your assumptions about safety and normalcy can evaporate like morning mist. Maybe you know what that feels like. To be erased politely, but thoroughly. To sit in a room full of people who think they know you while carrying knowledge that could save their lives. Knowledge they'd never think to ask you about. I wasn't hiding my rank to be mysterious. I wasn't playing games. I was just done explaining myself to people who never listened. 7 years ago, I'd tried to tell them about my promotion to major. Evan had interrupted with a joke about how I'd probably bribed someone with perfectly organized filing cabinets. The conversation had moved on before I could finish my sentence. 4 years ago, I'd mentioned my deployment to emergency response training. My mother had nodded absently and asked if I'd learned anything useful for organizing charity events. 2 years ago, I'd been promoted to colonel. I'd driven to a different family gathering, the new insignia bright on my uniform, ready to share the achievement with people who should have been proud. Evan had taken one look at me and announced to everyone that I was still playing dress-up. The room had laughed. I'd excused myself early and driven back to base in silence. After that, I stopped trying. Let them think what they wanted. Let them see what they expected to see. It was easier than fighting for recognition from people who'd already decided who I was. But sitting here now, watching them fumble with information I'd been processing for hours, I felt something shift in my chest. Not anger that was too hot, too immediate. This was colder, more focused. This was the moment when their assumptions were about to meet reality. My encrypted device sat silent on the table, its black screen reflecting the afternoon sun. In 3 minutes, it would ring. When I answered, everything would change. Not because I wanted it to. Not because I'd planned some dramatic revelation. Because when lives are on the line, the truth has a way of surfacing, whether you're ready for it or not. Nicole was still filming, her voice breathless with excitement. This is literally like a movie, guys. We're in the middle of an actual emergency. Evan paced behind the grill, his earlier confidence replaced by the kind of helplessness that comes from realizing you're not the person people look to when things get serious. My mother kept rereading the alert as if the words might change. And I sat there, uniform-pressed insignia hidden, carrying the weight of knowledge and authority that none of them would have believed if I'd told them. But I wouldn't have to tell them. They were about to see it. Watching Evan pace behind that grill, panic creeping into his movements, I remembered another afternoon 11 years ago. Different setting, same helpless look in his eyes, when things didn't go according to his plan. He'd been the family's golden boy, then. ROTC star football captain, the one everyone called future general, with proud knowing smiles. At 17, Evan James was everything a military family wanted in a son broad shoulders. Natural leadership, the kind of confidence that filled rooms and commanded attention. I was 16, honor student debate team captain, the one who studied late into the night while he lifted weights and practiced his parade stance. I was also the one who'd scored higher on every military aptitude test we'd both taken, but no one talked about that. The National Cadet Appointment Program had been my ticket, a pipeline into officer training for exceptional high school students. Early admission accelerated track, a guaranteed path to the kind of military career I'd dreamed about since I was 12 years old. I'd spent months on that application, essays about leadership philosophy, detailed project portfolios, letters of recommendation from teachers who'd watched me organize fundraisers and coordinate volunteer efforts. My grades were perfect. My test scores were in the top percentile. I'd even completed additional coursework in military history and strategic planning. The night I submitted it, I'd felt something I rarely allowed myself to feel: certainty. This was my path. This was where I belonged. 6 weeks later, I got the rejection letter. Thank you for your interest in the National Cadet Appointment Program. Unfortunately, we received notification that you have withdrawn your application. As per program policy, voluntary withdrawals cannot be reversed within the same academic year. I stared at that letter for 20 minutes, reading it over and over. Withdrawn my application. I'd never withdrawn anything in my life. I'd called the program office immediately, my voice shaking with confusion and desperation. Yes, Miss James, we have your withdrawal email on file. Dated 3 weeks ago, you cited personal reasons and indicated you were no longer interested in military service. Personal reasons. No longer interested in military service. The words felt like ice water in my veins. I'd hung up and gone straight to my email, searched through sent messages, deleted items, every folder I could think of. Nothing. No record of any withdrawal email. But there was something else. A password change notification from 2 days before the supposed withdrawal. Someone had accessed my account. It took me 3 days to piece together what had happened. 3 days of quiet investigation, checking browser histories, and asking careful questions. 3 days of watching my brother come home from ROTC practice with that satisfied smile, the one that said everything was going according to plan. The withdrawal email had been sent from my account while I was at debate practice. The same night, Evan had been home alone with my laptop, claiming he needed to print something for school. The same night, he'd asked me about my email password, saying he wanted to send me a funny video. He'd forged my electronic signature on a withdrawal form, used my personal information to create a convincing message about changed priorities and family expectations. Made it look like I'd simply decided military service wasn't for me. The program coordinator had been sympathetic but firm. I understand your concern, Miss James, but we have clear documentation of your withdrawal. The program policy is designed to prevent applicants from gaming the system. You're welcome to reapply in 3 years. 3 years? By then I'd be 20. The early admission advantage would be gone. The accelerated track would be close to me. I'd be starting from scratch while my classmates were already officers. I'd been marked as non-committal in the system, a student who'd wasted everyone's time by applying and then backing out. It would follow me to every subsequent application, every interview, every opportunity. That night, I'd sat in my room with the letter in my hands, staring at the official letterhead until the words blurred together. I could have confronted him, could have demanded he confess, could have fought the decision, could have made him face what he'd done. But I'd looked at him across the dinner table, my parents beaming as he talked about his latest ROTC accomplishments, his plans for military academy, his bright future as a leader, and I'd made a different choice. I didn't lose the path. I lost the shortcut. And I climbed the hard way, alone. While Evan coasted through his expected trajectory, I worked 3 jobs to pay for community college. While he enjoyed his automatic acceptance to military academy, I studied for entrance exams in a shared apartment with paper-thin walls. While he networked with the sons of generals, I cleaned equipment and took night classes and proved myself one small step at a time. He'd stolen my easy road. So I built my own. Every promotion I earned, every commendation I received, every moment of recognition I achieved, it was mine. Not because someone expected it from me, not because I fit the perfect profile, but because I'd fought for it when no one was watching. The family never knew. How could they? Evan had protected his golden boy status by eliminating the competition before it could threaten him. And I'd learned something valuable in the process. Sometimes silence is its own kind of power. I'd graduated from officer school with honors, made captain ahead of schedule, earned my emergency response certification while he was still figuring out how to manage a supply unit. And now, 11 years later, watching him pace in panic while I sat with knowledge that could save lives, I felt the strange symmetry of the moment. He'd tried to erase me once, tried to make me disappear before I could prove what I was capable of. But you can't erase someone who refuses to stay invisible. My encrypted device would ring in 30 seconds. And when it did, the golden boy would finally meet the shadow he'd tried so hard to eliminate. The years after the sabotage blurred together in a haze of early mornings and late nights of proving myself to people who had no idea what I was proving. I cleaned gear at the local National Guard armory for $12 an hour, scrubbed mud from boots, organized supply closets, maintained equipment that officers would use without ever knowing my name. My hands were raw from industrial cleaner, my back ached from lifting ammunition crates, and I went home each night smelling like gun oil and sweat. During officer school, I slept in a trailer park outside Fort Benning. 30 feet of cramped space with thin walls and a window unit that rattled all night. My neighbors were mostly other students who couldn't afford base housing, but unlike them, I had no family money to fall back on. No trust fund or parental support to ease the transition. While my classmates went out for drinks after training, I worked nights at a 24-hour diner serving coffee to truck drivers and taking abuse from customers who thought a young woman in a food service uniform was fair game for their frustrations. I'd finish a shift at 6 a.m, shower in the trailer's cramped bathroom, and report for PT at 7. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was training to be an officer during the day and cleaning up after other people at night. But every dollar I earned was mine. Every small victory was something I'd fought for without anyone's help. Back home, the family narrative had already been written. Jordan's taking some time to figure herself out, my mother would say at family gatherings, her voice carrying that careful tone people use when discussing someone's failure. You know how it is, not everyone finds their path right away. But it was Evan who crafted the story that stuck. Yeah, she couldn't handle the pressure, he'd tell anyone who asked. Wasn't really cut out for it. Military life's not for everyone. He'd shake his head with what looked like genuine sympathy. The perfect big brother, disappointed but not surprised by his sister's limitations. He'd taken over family stories, positioning himself as the voice of authority on my life and choices. I heard about it through Sarah, who was still young enough to repeat conversations without understanding their weight. She'd mentioned it casually during a phone call, not realizing she was describing the systematic erasure of my actual experience. Evan says you decided the army wasn't for you, she'd said. That you tried it, but it was too hard. Too hard. The words had cut deeper than I'd expected. Not because they were true, but because they represented the narrative that would follow me. The story that would be told at family dinners and holiday gatherings. The convenient explanation for why the smart daughter had simply disappeared. I could have corrected it. Could have called home more often, sent pictures from training, shared small victories and milestones. But I'd learned something valuable from watching my brother operate. Sometimes the best response to being underestimated is to let people underestimate you. So I buried my fire in the only place they'd never look: discipline. While they thought I'd given up, I was mastering tactical communications. While they assumed I'd failed, I was earning commendations for leadership under pressure. While they crafted stories about my limitations, I was learning to make split-second decisions that would save lives. Every early morning run became a meditation on endurance. Every difficult training exercise became proof that I could handle whatever came next. Every promotion became a quiet vindication that no one else would ever see. The hardest part wasn't the physical demands or the financial struggle. It was the isolation, the knowledge that I was succeeding in a world my family couldn't see, building a life they wouldn't understand, becoming someone they'd never recognize. But isolation taught me something valuable about leadership. Real authority doesn't come from being acknowledged. It comes from being reliable when everything else falls apart. I learned to lead by example in situations where no one was watching. I learned to make decisions based on what needed to be done, not what would get me credit. I learned to carry responsibility without needing applause. And slowly, gradually, I became the kind of officer who gets called when things go wrong. The kind who shows up prepared, who asks the right questions, who makes the hard choices without hesitation. The family never knew about my first deployment, never knew about the commendations or the emergency response certifications, never knew about the nights I'd coordinate evacuations or the mornings I'd brief senior officers on crisis management. They had their story, I had my reality. Evan had succeeded in stealing my shortcut, but he'd also given me something more valuable, the knowledge that I could build something real from nothing, that I could succeed without anyone's permission or approval. Sitting at that picnic table, watching him panic over an emergency alert, I realized that his sabotage had been the making of me. He'd forced me to become self-reliant. He'd taught me that the only recognition that mattered was the kind that came from doing the work regardless of who was watching. In 10 seconds, my encrypted device would ring, and they would all discover what I'd become while they weren't looking. The emergency alert had settled into the background of their panic, but Nicole's need for content never paused. She'd switched from filming the breaking news back to what she thought was easier entertainment me. "Okay, guys, back to our regularly scheduled programming," she announced to her phone, that performative energy returning to her voice. Here's Colonel Clipboard again, still sitting there like she's actually important. The laughter was more nervous now, distracted by the lingering anxiety of the fire alert, but it was still laughter. Still the familiar sound of my relevance being dismissed for someone else's amusement. Evan had found his footing again after the initial shock of the emergency alert. The immediate crisis had passed, or so he thought, and he was back to his favorite role, the charming older brother who knew how to work a crowd. "Let's be honest," he said, gesturing toward me with his beer bottle. "If she's in uniform, it's probably for the food court discount." More chuckles. My nephew looked confused, glancing between the adults as he tried to understand why everyone was laughing. Uncle Mike was checking his phone again, still worried about the fire, but the rest of them had settled back into the comfortable routine of making me the punchline. Sarah, my teenage cousin, squinted at me from across the table. She'd been quiet during most of the earlier mockery, but now, something in her expression had sharpened. "Wait, is she really in the army?" The question hung in the air like smoke from the grill. Simple words, but they carried weight that made everyone pause. Because for all their jokes about uniforms and food courts, none of them had actually bothered to ask. I adjusted my sleeve, the fabric shifting to cover the insignia on my shoulder. The eagles there were small, but they meant everything. They represented years of work that no one in this family had witnessed, achievements they'd never bothered to learn about, authority they couldn't imagine I possessed. "Still am," I said quietly. The words were simple, matter of fact. No anger, no defensiveness, no attempt to explain or justify. Just the truth delivered with the same calm I'd used in briefing rooms and crisis situations and moments when lives hung in the balance. But they didn't hear it that way, couldn't hear it that way, because they'd already decided who I was. "Right, but like..." Nicole was back to her phone, still filming, still pushing for content. "What do you actually do?" "Like day-to-day stuff." I could have told her, could have explained incident command protocols or emergency response coordination, could have mentioned the certifications that let me override local authorities during crisis situations, or the clearance level that put classified briefings on my desk every morning. Instead, I took another sip of water and watched a cloud pass over the lake. The shadow moved across the surface like a dark mirror there and gone in seconds. "She files reports," Evan said, filling the silence with his confident authority on my life. "Organizes supplies, administrative stuff. Nothing wrong with that, but it's not exactly..." He gestured vaguely, searching for words that would diminish without seeming cruel. "Exciting," Nicole suggested, still filming. "Important," he corrected, and there it was. The word that cut deepest because it was exactly what they all thought. That whatever I did, whoever I'd become, it didn't matter. Not really. My mother was scrolling through her phone, distracted by something. Uncle Mike had wandered to the deck railing, still scanning the horizon for signs of smoke. The birthday party had fractured into individual anxieties, people dealing with the fire alert in their own ways. But Evan and Nicole were still focused on me, still mining my presence for entertainment value, still treating my uniform like a costume, my service like a hobby, my life like a joke they could share with strangers on the internet. I sat there invisible, in plain sight. Wearing the symbols of authority they couldn't see, carrying knowledge they couldn't fathom, holding rank they'd never believe. The weight of my encrypted device pressed against my leg through my pocket. Any second now it would ring. Any second now everything would change. But for this moment, this last moment, I was still just Jordan. Still the forgotten daughter, the helpful one, the sister who'd never quite measured up to their expectations. Then everyone's phones buzzed at once, again. This time the buzzing wasn't just phones, it was everything. Car alarms from the parking lot, the emergency broadcast system crackling to life over the lodge's outdoor speakers, and underneath it all growing louder by the second, the wail of sirens racing up the mountain road. The second alert was different, urgent, the kind that makes your stomach drop before your brain processes the words. Wildfire breach, immediate evacuation ordered. All residents and visitors must leave area immediately. This is not a drill. Nicole's phone clattered to the deck as she scrambled to read her screen. The live stream forgotten her performance mask slipping to reveal genuine fear. Oh God, this is real. This is actually happening. Around us, the lodge erupted into chaos. Guests burst from their cabins, voices raised in panic and confusion. A child started crying somewhere in the distance, that high, terrified sound that cuts through everything else. Car doors slammed. Engines started and stalled. People shouted over each other, asking questions no one could answer. Where do we go? My mother's voice was thin, stretched tight with fear. How bad is it? Uncle Mike was standing now, scanning the tree line, as if he could see the fire approaching. The roads clear. Sarah's teenage confidence had evaporated, leaving behind the scared kid she actually was. Evan stood frozen by the grill, the spatula still in his hand, his golden boy confidence crumbling, as he realized this wasn't something he could charm or joke his way through. Maybe we call someone. Then my encrypted device pinged, not the standard notification sound of a regular phone, the sharp, authoritative tone that meant official business, critical business. The sound that had pulled me from sleep for emergency deployments, interrupted dinners for crisis coordination, summoned me to briefings that would determine whether people lived or died. I pulled the device from my pocket. The screen showed a secure connection request from Incident Command. I accepted the call, and suddenly everything else, the panic, the sirens, the chaos, became background noise. Colonel James, my voice was calm, professional. The voice I used when lives hung in the balance. Ma'am, this is command. Code red confirmed. Wildfire has breached eastern containment, winds shifting southwest. We have multiple structures threatened and approximately 200 civilians in the impact zone. We need you to assume incident command for North Sector immediately. I processed the information in seconds. 200 civilians. North Sector, that was us. The lodge, the cabins, the access roads. I was looking at the people I'd been ordered to protect. Understood. Current resources. National Guard convoy en route ETA 6 minutes. Local emergency services are overwhelmed. You're our ranking officer on scene. Copy that. I have eyes on approximately 30 civilians at current location. We'll establish staging area and begin coordinated evacuation. Send me wind patterns and fuel moisture data. Transmitting now, Colonel. You have operational authority for all emergency personnel in your sector. I ended the call and stood up, my movements precise and unhurried. Around me, chaos continued to build. People grabbing belongings, loading cars with random items, asking the same panicked questions over and over. I removed my blazer, folding it carefully, and setting it on the picnic table. Without the civilian jacket covering them, my rank insignia became visible. Full Colonel eagles on my shoulders, service ribbons across my chest. The symbols of authority I'd earned through years they'd never bothered to learn about. Everyone quiet. My voice cut through the panic like a blade. Not shouting, not demanding. Just the tone of absolute command that makes people stop and listen without understanding why. Listen. This is an active situation. I need you to focus on my voice and follow instructions exactly. The immediate area fell silent. Nicole stared at me, her mouth slightly open. Evan had gone pale, the spatula finally slipping from his hand to clatter on the deck. My mother looked confused, as if she was seeing me for the first time. Who put her in charge? Someone shouted from the crowd of lodge guests. a man in his 50s, red-faced and indignant. "This is chaos. Someone needs to call the authorities." That's when I saw the ranger. He'd been coordinating evacuations from the other cabins, moving through the crowd with practiced efficiency. But when he heard the challenge, when he looked in my direction and saw my uniform, he stopped dead. His eyes went to my shoulders, to the eagles there, to the ribbons that told the story of a career this family had never bothered to read. "Sir," he said, his voice carrying across the suddenly quiet deck. He was pointing directly at my rank insignia, his fingers steady and sure. "That's a full bird, Colonel. She outranks every responder here." Silence. Not the comfortable quiet of a family gathering, but the stunned breath-holding silence of people whose entire understanding of reality has just shifted beneath their feet. The ranger continued, his voice respectful but firm. "Ma'am, Ranger Thompson, Local Emergency Services. What are your orders?" I could feel their eyes on me, could see Evan's face cycling through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear. Could watch Nicole slowly lower her phone, her content creator persona completely forgotten. My nephew whispered, "Aunt Jordan." His 8-year-old voice was small, odd. But there wasn't time for family revelations or explanations. There wasn't time for the conversations that should have happened years ago, for the recognition I'd stopped expecting, for the apologies that might or might not come. There were 200 people in danger. There was a fire moving toward us with the wind at its back. There were evacuation routes to coordinate and resources to deploy, and decisions to make that would determine whether everyone went home safely. I'd spent 7 years being invisible to these people. 7 years being the helpful one, the steady one, the one who didn't really matter. But invisibility, I'd learned, could be its own kind of preparation. All those years of being overlooked had taught me to lead without needing attention, to make decisions without requiring approval, to carry authority without demanding recognition. The sirens were getting closer, smoke was starting to darken the horizon, and for the first time in years, my family was finally ready to listen. The National Guard convoy arrived in a cloud of dust and diesel exhaust, their vehicles, moving with military precision up the winding mountain road. 6 trucks, 2 command vehicles, and an ambulance, exactly what I'd requested during my second call to Incident Command. The lead vehicle hadn't even come to a complete stop before a young lieutenant jumped out, his boots hitting the gravel with practiced efficiency. His eyes swept the chaos of the evacuation scene, looking for whoever was supposed to be in charge. When he saw me standing in my dress uniform with my insignia clearly visible, he snapped to attention so fast it was almost theatrical. "Ma'am, Key." His voice carried across the parking lot, cutting through the noise of engines and shouted conversations. "Lieutenant Anderson, Nevada National Guard, we're ready to follow your command." The effect was immediate and devastating to everything my family thought they knew about me. Evan physically stumbled backward, his shoulder hitting the deck railing. The color had drained from his face completely, leaving him looking like he'd seen something impossible. His mouth opened and closed. Without sound, the golden boy confidence that had defined him for 28 years, cracking like old paint. Nicole, who had been frantically trying to restart her live stream, froze with her finger halfway to her phone screen. Her eyes were wide, darting between me and the National Guard soldiers, now moving with crisp efficiency around the staging area. For the first time since I'd known her, she was completely speechless. My mother stood with one hand pressed to her chest, staring at me as if I were a stranger wearing her daughter's face. "Jordan," she whispered, What is this?" But there wasn't time for family dynamics. The wind was picking up, carrying the smell of smoke stronger now. I could see the orange glow on the horizon, still distant, but moving our way with the kind of determined hunger that wildfires have when all the conditions align in their favor. "Lieutenant Anderson, Andi," I said, my voice carrying the authority of someone who'd done this before. "What's your assessment of the access roads? Highway 207 is clear for now, but we're monitoring conditions. We've got spotters positioned at the 3-mile mark. If the fire jumps the canyon, we'll have maybe 20 minutes before that route becomes compromised. Secondary routes. Forest Service Road 118 is open but rough. 4-wheel drive recommended. It adds 40 minutes to evacuation time, but keeps us away from the main fire line." I processed the information, weighing options with the kind of calm calculation that comes from years of training. Around me, the civilian world was still catching up to what was happening. But my world, the world of emergency response and life or death decisions, was moving at its own steady pace. Set up a staging area by the main lodge, I directed. Elderly and disabled evacuees, first then families with small children. I want traffic controllers at both road junctions. No one leaves without checking in. Medical triage station here. I pointed to a flat area near the parking lot. And get me a direct line to the incident meteorologist. I need real-time wind data. Yes, ma'am. Lieutenant Anderson turned to his team, relaying orders with the kind of efficiency that turns chaos into organized movement. I watched my family watch me. Watched them try to reconcile the person they thought they knew with the reality unfolding in front of them. Watched years of assumptions crumble in real time. Jordan, Evan's voice was hoarse, confused. When did you become someone who matters? I finished quietly. He flinched as if I'd slapped him. 7 years ago, I continued, my voice level. When I graduated officer training, 5 years ago when I made major, 3 years ago when I earned my emergency response certification, 2 years ago when I made colonel. Each statement hit like a physical blow. I could see him calculating, trying to match my timeline with his memories of family gatherings, where he'd dismissed my career, where he'd told everyone I was just pushing papers and filing reports. But you never said, my mother started. I tried. The words came out sharper than I'd intended. Multiple times, you weren't interested in listening. Around us, the evacuation was gaining momentum. The guard soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, directing traffic, helping elderly guests to waiting vehicles, setting up the command structure that would coordinate our response. Children who had been crying were now curious about the soldiers. Adults who had been panicking were now following clear instructions. Order was emerging from chaos. It always did when the right systems were in place. Ma'am, Ranger Thompson approached with a radio in his hand. We've got 3 families still unaccounted for in the upper cabins. Do you want us to send a search team? Negative. Too risky with current wind conditions. I looked at my watch, calculating time and distance. How many personnel can you spare for evacuation assistance? 4 rangers plus myself. Good. I want 2 rangers at each checkpoint coordinating with the guard traffic controllers. No one gets left behind, but no one takes unnecessary risks either. Understood, ma'am. As Thompson walked away, I caught Nicole staring at me with something that looked like recognition dawning in her eyes. Her phone was still in her hand, but she wasn't filming anymore. She was just watching. You really are a colonel, she said quietly. It wasn't a question. I really am. And you've been, this whole time, Evan found his voice again, though it sounded hollow. The uniform, when you showed up today. You came straight from base. Standby leave, which means I can be recalled to active duty at any time. I gestured toward the organized evacuation happening around us. Like now, he was quiet for a long moment, watching soldiers follow my orders with the kind of immediate respect he'd spent his whole life trying to earn. Why didn't you tell us? I looked at him, really looked at him for the first time in years. Saw past the golden boy facade, to the insecurity underneath. Saw the brother who'd been so afraid of being overshadowed that he'd tried to eliminate the competition before it could challenge him. Would you have listened? I asked. He didn't answer, couldn't answer, because we both knew the truth. My encrypted device buzzed with an update. Wind patterns were shifting. We had less time than originally estimated. The evacuation was about to become a race against fire and wind, and I was the one they'd all be looking to for answers. 3 hours later, the fire was under partial control. The immediate threat to the lodge had passed, though smoke still hung in the air like a gray curtain between us and the mountains. The evacuation had been textbook: no casualties, no panic, everyone accounted for, and safely relocated to the staging areas we'd established in the valley below. I stood by the command tent reviewing final reports with Lieutenant Anderson and Ranger Thompson. The adrenaline was starting to fade, leaving behind the familiar exhaustion that comes after crisis management. My uniform was wrinkled, now dusty from 3 hours of coordinating between multiple agencies, but the job was done. Most of the evacuees had been transported to temporary shelters in town. My family had left an hour ago, my mother insisting they needed to get my nephews somewhere safe for the night. Evan had tried to approach me before they left, but I'd been in the middle of coordinating with the fire chief about containment lines. He'd stood there for a moment, watching me work, then walked away without saying anything. Colonel Nicole's voice was quiet behind me. I turned to find her standing a few feet away, no longer the confident social media personality who'd been filming my life for entertainment. She looked smaller somehow, uncertain. "The evacuation went well," I said. It wasn't really a response to anything she'd asked, but I wasn't sure what else to say to someone who'd spent the afternoon discovering that their entertainment had been someone else's expertise. "I wanted to talk to you," she glanced around, making sure we were alone. "Before I left with the others, I waited." The evening air was cooler now, carrying the smell of ash and wet earth where the fire teams had been working. In the distance, I could hear the low rumble of engines as crews continued their containment work. "I was ROTC," she said suddenly. 2 years at UC Davis. Left after a back injury during training." Her voice was different now. No performance, no energy crafted for an audience, just honesty. "But I remember the protocols. I remember the briefings about emergency response and incident command structure." I studied her face, saw something there I hadn't noticed before, the kind of recognition that comes from shared experience, even if that experience was brief. "I remember your name," she continued quietly. "From the case studies we reviewed. Emergency response scenarios, leadership under pressure, Colonel Jordan James." She paused, her voice dropping even lower. I didn't connect it. Didn't think someone at a family barbecue could be the same person you'd studied in military leadership courses." She nodded, color rising in her cheeks. "I feel like an idiot." "You feel like someone who made assumptions. We all do it." For a moment, we stood in the fading light, two women who'd found themselves on different sides of perception and reality. Around us, the command structure was beginning to wind down. Soldiers packed equipment with the same efficiency they'd shown deploying it. The crisis was passing into history. Then Nicole did something I didn't expect. She stepped back, straightened her shoulders, and snapped a full formal salute. Not the casual gesture of someone playing soldier, but the crisp, precise movement of someone who'd been trained to show respect for rank and authority. Her form was perfect, hand positioned correctly, back straight, eyes forward. I returned the salute with the same precision, the same respect. For a moment, we held the position, officer and former cadet, connected by something deeper than the day's revelations. "At ease?" I said softly, and we both lowered our hands. "I'm sorry," she said, "for today, for the filming the jokes, for not seeing what was right in front of me." "We don't always get to choose when people see us," I replied. "Only who we are when they do." She was quiet for a moment, processing that. "You could have said something, earlier I mean, when we were making jokes. Would you have believed me?" The question hung between us like smoke. We both knew the answer. "No," she admitted. "Probably not." "Then saying something would have been pointless. Better to let actions speak." She nodded slowly, understanding dawning in her expression. "You've been dealing with this for a long time, haven't you? People not seeing who you really are. Long enough to know that proving yourself is better than explaining yourself." In the distance, a helicopter passed overhead, heading toward the fire line. The sound faded into the evening air, leaving us with the quiet that comes after storms, both the literal kind and the metaphorical ones that reshape everything you thought you knew. Nicole looked at me one more time, something like respect, replacing the earlier confusion in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for today, for keeping us safe." I nodded. It was enough. The next morning, I found myself back at the lodge. The evacuation order had been lifted, but the smell of smoke still clung to everything, the buildings, the trees, the air itself. I'd come to do a final assessment to make sure the area was truly safe for civilians to return. The parking lot was mostly empty now. A few maintenance crews worked to clear debris, and the lodge staff was beginning the process of reopening. But it was quiet in the way places are after emergencies pass, that strange combination of relief and exhaustion that settles over everything. I was reviewing incident reports by my rental car when I heard footsteps on gravel. I looked up to see Evan walking toward me alone. He moved differently than he had yesterday. Less confident, more careful, like someone navigating unfamiliar terrain. "You came back," he said when he reached me. "Final assessment. Making sure everything's secure before families start returning." I kept my voice professional, neutral. After 24 hours of crisis management, that tone came naturally. He nodded, though I could see he wasn't really thinking about lodge safety protocols. His eyes kept drifting to my uniform, to the insignia that had been hidden under a blazer just yesterday, to the evidence of a life he'd never bothered to learn about. You were really the one in charge. The question came out hesitant, like he was still trying to process what he'd witnessed. Yesterday, I mean. All those soldiers, the rangers, everyone taking orders from you. I looked him in the eye for the first time since he'd approached. Really looked at him past the golden boy facade, past the brother who'd spent years defining himself by diminishing me. I always was, Evan. You just couldn't stand it. The words hung between us like smoke. Direct, uncompromising, carrying the weight of 11 years of silence. He flinched, but didn't look away. I keep thinking about what you said, about trying to tell us, about the promotions, the achievements. His voice was quieter now, the performer's confidence completely gone. I remember some of those conversations. I remember cutting you off. You remember making jokes, changing the subject, making sure everyone knew that whatever I was doing, it wasn't important. I didn't think. He stopped, running a hand through his hair. No, that's not true. I did think. I was afraid you'd overshadow me. Again. Again. The word carried more honesty than anything else he'd said. The National Cadet Program, I said quietly. You sabotaged my application because you were afraid I'd get in and you wouldn't. His face went pale. We'd never spoken about it directly, never acknowledged what he'd done. For 11 years, it had been the unspoken truth between us. How long have you known? I figured it out 3 days after I got the rejection letter. Took me another week to understand why you'd done it. He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the asphalt between his feet. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. I'm sorry. I know that doesn't fix anything, but I'm sorry. I didn't know it would cost you everything. It didn't, I said, and the certainty in my voice seemed to surprise him. I got it back, piece by piece, while you told the story where I disappeared. But the time you lost the opportunities made me better, made me stronger, made me someone who could stand in that parking lot yesterday and coordinate a response that saved 200 lives. I paused, letting that sink in. Your sabotage didn't destroy me, Evan. It forged me. He looked up then, meeting my eyes for the first time since the conversation began. What I saw there wasn't the golden boy or the confident performer. It was just my brother, maybe for the first time in years. I watched you yesterday, he said slowly. Watched those soldiers snap to attention when they saw you. Watched you take control of chaos and turn it into something organized and safe. Watched you save people. His voice broke slightly, and I realized I don't know you at all. Haven't known you for years. You didn't want to know me. You wanted to keep me small so you could feel big. Yeah. The admission came out like a sigh. Yeah, I did. We stood there in the morning light, surrounded by the aftermath of crisis and revelation. Ash still drifted in the air, catching the sunlight like gray snow. In the distance, I could hear the sound of cleanup crews, working the normal rhythm of recovery beginning. You were never small, Jordan, he said, finally, his voice carrying something I'd never heard from him before: genuine respect. I just couldn't admit you were bigger than me. The words hit differently than an apology would have. They carried acknowledgement, truth, the kind of recognition I'd stopped expecting years ago. But they also came too late to change anything that mattered. I folded my incident reports and put them in my briefcase. The assessment was complete. The area was safe. My job here was done. I know, I said simply. And for the first time in 11 years, that was enough. The news stories started appearing within hours of the evacuation. Someone had filmed the National Guard convoy arriving, captured the moment Lieutenant Anderson snapped to attention when he saw my rank. Another video showed me directing traffic flow, my voice calm and clear as I coordinated between agencies. By the second day, the footage was everywhere. Local news picked it up first. Female Army colonel leads wildfire evacuation, but it spread quickly beyond regional coverage. The contrast was too compelling for social media to ignore. The quiet woman in uniform, who'd been dismissed as irrelevant, suddenly revealed as the commanding officer who'd saved hundreds of lives. My phone started ringing before I'd even made it back to base. Producers wanting interviews, writers proposing book deals, military publication editors requesting feature articles. The mayor's office called about a ceremony. The governor's aide mentioned a possible commendation. Colonel James, this is Rebecca Martinez from Channel 7 News. We'd love to do a segment on your background, your career, the heroic actions during the evacuation. Heroic. The word felt strange. I'd done my job, followed my training, applied protocols I'd practiced dozens of times in different scenarios. There was nothing heroic about competence. I declined the interview. The next call came from a documentary filmmaker who'd seen the viral footage. This is exactly the kind of story people need to hear right now. A woman succeeding in a male-dominated field, overcoming family dismissal, proving herself when it mattered most. I declined that too. By the end of the week, the offers had multiplied. A publishing house wanted my memoir. A speaking bureau offered a lecture circuit about leadership under pressure. Someone proposed a made-for-TV movie about the evacuation. I said no to all of them, except one. The call came from Linda Thompson, the head of the Regional Emergency Management Office. She'd heard about my background, about the successful evacuation, about my emergency response certifications. We've been trying to get funding for a youth emergency preparedness program, she said, focused on girls aged 12 to 18. Teaching basic first aid, crisis communication, leadership under pressure. The kind of skills that could save lives someday. What do you need? I asked. A sponsor. Someone with credibility, with a track record. Someone who could help us make the case for funding. I thought about Sarah, my teenage cousin, and how she'd look during those first moments of panic. About all the young women who might find themselves in crisis situations someday with no training, no confidence, no knowledge of what they were capable of. I'll do it, I said, but quietly. No press releases, no publicity, just the program. Are you sure the visibility could help with additional funding? I'm sure. I didn't tell my family about the program, didn't mention it to anyone except the people who needed to know. It wasn't their story to tell or mine to publicize. It was just work that needed doing. 2 weeks after the evacuation, I found myself walking the edge of the forest where the fire had been contained. The burn line was stark against the green, a clear demarcation between what had been saved and what had been lost. New growth was already beginning to emerge from the ash, small green shoots, pushing through the blackened earth. I carried a clipboard reviewing the final incident report one more time before submitting it. The facts were simple: 200 civilians evacuated, 0 casualties, minimal property damage. The operation had been successful by every measurable standard. But standing there in the silence, looking at the evidence of destruction and renewal, I understood something that couldn't be captured in any report. Legacy isn't made in spotlight. It's forged in smoke and silence. The viral videos would fade. The news stories would be replaced by other stories. The offers for interviews and book deals would move on to other subjects. But somewhere young women would learn how to respond in crisis. They'd practice leadership skills and emergency protocols. They'd discover that competence was more valuable than recognition, that preparation mattered more than publicity. And maybe when their moment came, when sirens started screaming and people looked around for someone to follow, they'd step forward with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing exactly who they are. I folded the incident report and put it in my briefcase. The forest was peaceful now, the danger past. In a few months, you'd hardly be able to tell there had been a fire here at all. But the work would continue, quietly, without fanfare, the way it always had, the way it always would. A month later, they installed a plaque at the rebuilt community hall. I hadn't planned to attend the ceremony. Official recognition had never been the point, and I'd grown comfortable with operating outside the spotlight. But Linda Thompson had called personally, mentioning that the first group of girls had completed their emergency preparedness training. 12 young women ages 12 to 18 now certified in basic first aid and crisis response. They asked if you'd be there, she'd said. They want to meet the person who made the program possible. So I stood off to the side as the mayor unveiled the brushed steel memorial, watching families gather to commemorate the day their community had faced disaster and emerged intact. The plaque was simple, elegant, no fanfare, just facts etched in metal that would outlast the people who remembered the fire. My name glinted in the afternoon sunlight: Colonel Jordan James, quiet strength, proven leadership. The words felt strange, seeing my identity rendered in permanent form for strangers to read. For 30 years, I'd been defined by other people's perceptions: the helpful daughter, the forgotten sibling, the woman playing soldier. Now I was defined by my own actions, by competence, proven under pressure. Behind the hill, the fire line still smoldered. Thin wisps of smoke rose from the blackened earth, where crews continued monitoring for hot spots. The danger had passed, but the evidence remained a reminder that disaster could return without warning, that preparation was never wasted effort. "Excuse me." I looked down to find a small girl in a scout uniform standing nearby. She couldn't have been more than 10, with serious dark eyes and perfectly pressed badges covering her sash. She'd been watching me throughout the ceremony, her gaze steady and curious. "Are you really her?" she asked, pointing toward the plaque. "The Colonel, I am." She studied my face with the kind of intense focus children bring to important questions. Around us, families chatted and took pictures, but she seemed oblivious to the crowd. "I want to be like her," she said, quietly, still looking at me. "Like you." The words hit with unexpected force, not because they were flattering, but because they carried the weight of possibility, of potential, of a future I might have helped shape, without realizing it. I met her eyes, seeing something familiar there. The quiet determination of someone who understood that leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. The steady confidence of someone who knew that competence mattered more than recognition. I didn't smile, didn't offer platitudes about following dreams or believing in herself. Instead, I simply nodded, once a gesture of acknowledgement, between equals, between someone who had walked the path and someone who was just beginning to find it. She nodded back, understanding, passing between us without words. The sun glinted off the plaque one more time as clouds drifted across the sky. Ash still hung in the air, so fine it was almost invisible, but there nonetheless a reminder of fire survived, of crisis met and overcome. As the ceremony wound down and families began to drift away, I found myself alone with the memorial. The words caught the light: quiet strength, proven leadership. Still playing soldier, I murmured to myself, remembering Evan's mocking words from what felt like a lifetime ago. I looked at the plaque, at the evidence of competence carved in steel, at the proof that recognition wasn't something you demanded, but something you earned. "No," I said quietly. I just stopped asking permission to lead. The ash settled around me like snow, and for the first time in years, I felt completely at peace with who I had become.